It's time to start sewing our beautiful Lagan coat. We are in part 2 of the sew along. You too can sew a beautiful coat like this. Let's get into it. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and for the next couple of episodes about coat sewing. If you've never sewn a coat for yourself before, there's no need to worry. I am here to support you and hold your hand. I've been planning this for months. Back in February when I made my Lagan coat from each to stitch, I took a whole week to sew it and film it for you, knowing that it was going to be released in early autumn, and I'm very excited to be able to share this with you and have it as a gift for you who are subscribed to this channel. The sew along is in full detail and just take it seam by seam. You will be able to do it. I'm breaking it up into small chunks, into areas of the coat. I'm not doing it in just one full video. It could be a little bit overwhelming like that. And in this episode, which is episode 2, we will see about sewing the bodice, the collar, the side seams, and the waistband. Before you start sewing your coat, please go ahead and watch episode 1 if you haven't yet already. It's already up on the channel, and there you will see a full review of the pattern, every single detail about the pattern you wanted to know. There's also a chat about how you can approach making your muslin. I highly suggest you do. Please don't skip that. There's also a discussion of fabric choice, sizing. There is really a lot of information in episode 1, so don't skip that one before you start sewing your coat. I've done a few things to simplify the way that you can follow along this sew along. You might come back to it later for specific steps. So if you scroll on the screen, on the top there'll be a pink area that always says the step that I'm on. So if I'm sewing collar, it'll say collar there on the top. Also in the description box of the video, I've written chapters. So you can click up to where specific area you want to go in any specific time. If you want to see the collar, you can click where it says collar and it will take you straight there. So you don't have to be searching. So you'll find a lot of detailed information there in the chapters. Every little bit is going to be detailed there with the minutes, and you can find them there really easily. Remember the Lagan coat from each to stitch, which is the pattern we're using here, is still on its release week. That means it's 20% off. You can find my affiliate link down below if you'd like to support the work that I do through there by buying the coat. I get a little commission back from there that doesn't cost you any extra. Now there are a few things I want to go over before we head into the sewing, and one of them has got to do with pressing. Now, when I do my sew alongs and I film everything, I don't film myself pressing. I have done so in the past and the tripod always gets in the way, and I've had a few burns because of the tripod. I've burnt my arms, so it's just a safety hazard. I do not film myself ironing anymore. But if you have tools like a ham, it would be really, really helpful for you to be able to press these princess seams. They are curved seams, so if you place that behind while you're pressing, it's going to help you get a really nice curved finish. So if you have that, that is awesome. You don't have a ham like me, I've never had one. I just get a towel and roll it up and try to conform the shape of my princess seam to that, place it underneath, and then I steam it. That's just how I go around this. Also, there is a tool made out of wood called a clapper. If you have one, that's great because it's really going to help that seam lie flat. Most of the seams in the Lagan coat get pressed to one side. There are a few that get pressed open, but I would suggest pressing all of the seams open first, pressing that, and then pressing it to the side it's going to go. That's going to give you a nicer result. What I do to replace a clapper, because I don't have one, I just get a really big book. My husband has lots of books. Doesn't matter which one. So I steam my seam, I press my iron, just throw a lot of steam on it. I throw my book on it as soon as I can and I leave it there for a good 10 seconds or more. Then I get my book and keep going up the seam as I'm pressing. It can be a bit of a lengthy process. Don't skimp on your pressing. Don't just skip it and just do it half-half, because it's really going to make a difference in the way that the coat looks in the end. You know, you want your seams really flat, and it's not just because of looks, it's also going to be for ease of sewing. Wool material, coating material can be a bit bulkier, a little more difficult to sew with the layers, so the flatter your seam is, the nicer it's going to look. So putting your clapper on it or your book for a little bit is going to help set that steam in there and just really help that seam lay super flat. So that's about that. You won't see me pressing or anything like that during the sew along, but you know how I do it. Also, there are lots of little marks on the pattern pieces. There are notches, there are dots, especially around the yoke area, the upper collar, the under collar, and the collar stands. You have lots of dots with little letters on them. That will help you put everything together like a puzzle. It's really, really easy the way it's been thought out. So what I did was mark with a yellow coloring pencil, just because it's a good contrast to the color of my wall. I dip it in water and I just do my dots. And those dots are not going to erase or go away or move anywhere like chalk does sometimes. Friction pens did not work for me this time on the wall. It's just too fuzzy. It just doesn't get the color in there. So just find a tool that is going to last, that you know your notch that you marked when you're starting the project is not going to be gone by the time you get to it. In my case, coloring pencils always work a treat. You won't see them. They'll all be hidden inside. So if you have a little yellow dot here and there, it doesn't really matter. So that's my advice to you. I think coloring pencils are so good. Another thing that I can't leave out and not mention is the presser feet that I like to use. You can use a 1/4 inch presser foot and move the needle to the left. That will mean that the needle will go into this little opening on the side, and that will give you a 3/8 seam allowance. That is going to be super helpful for all the top stitching, because lots of the seams are top stitched with 3/8 seam allowance. Having the presser foot do the work for you is a time saver, and it also saves your mind from trying to sew really straight, because you don't have to do an effort. The presser foot is doing it for you. The other presser foot I use has a G on it, and it's a blind hem presser foot. If you move the needle to the left, you can sew on the edge. This one will be handy later on. The one you'll use mostly though is the 1/4 inch presser foot, but both are very handy, and not just for a coat, just for life, for regular sewing. So helpful. You need 2 types of interfacing. I've got 2 here to show you. Now don't ask me about brands and things, because all the ones I buy here have no brand. I have no idea, but I do know what they are. You need a lightweight tricot interfacing. It's usually the type you use for neat projects. This is black, it's very lightweight, and it stretches. So this is the type of interfacing you need to fuse an area of the hem for the skirt pieces and the sleeve pieces. This will give a little structure to the hem without making it stiff. So that's the difference. You need this type of interfacing for those areas, and in the pattern, you won't have pattern pieces for those areas that need to be interfaced. You just need to calculate the depth, it says there, all the way across the bottom on all the skirt pieces and both the upper and the undersleeve of the main fabric. So you need that type of interfacing for that. And then for the other pieces that need interfacing, you need lightweight tailor's interfacing that does not stretch. So this is how mine looks. It's really lightweight, it's almost transparent, it doesn't stretch at all. It's very nice, doesn't stretch in any direction. And this is what you're going to need to interface your front pieces of the bodice, the waistband, all the collar pieces and the facing. Now, as you know, I like to block fuse. I did block my facing, my 2 collar stand pieces, my under collar, which is interfaced, and also the front bodice pieces. I blocked fuse those, meaning I got my pattern pieces, put them on top of my wall, figured out an area a little larger than that and interface that area, and then put my pattern pieces on top and cut them out. I try to stay really consistent with doing that, and it gives me pattern pieces that don't deform, don't shrink, don't change shape. So I really suggest that you do some block fusing for that. If you want to, if you don't, you can take time to cut different interfacing pieces and then fuse them onto your pattern pieces. Now we are first going to start with an overview of the pattern pieces, how they look, the pattern pieces that you cut from your main fabric, and also the pattern pieces that you cut from the lining fabric. You will see that the lining fabric pieces are much more simplified. There's less pieces compared to the main pieces. So let's get started with an overview of all the pattern pieces. These are all the pieces that will make up the back of the coat. The ones on the top are for the bodice. Center back, there is a center back seam, and the side back, princess seams. There is a waistband that goes in between them, and then come the skirt pieces, center back and the side back skirt. You can see that all the hems have a portion that has been interfaced, about 5 inches of it. Lightweight interfacing, tricot interfacing. The waistband has been interfaced with regular interfacing, regular tailor's interfacing that is a little heavier weight than the ones on the hem. These are the pieces that make up the front. You can see that the front bodice pieces are fully interfaced. Center front, side front, there are the princess seams. It is the same waistband that will attach to the whole coat because it's just one piece that's cut on the fold. And here are the skirt pieces for the front. Center front skirt, side front skirt. To provide structure to the hem, these areas have also been interfaced. Here are the rest of the pieces. Here we have the upper sleeve and the undersleeve from the main fabric. They also have an area at the bottom that has been interfaced. This single piece is not interfaced and it's the upper collar. These are 2 yoke pieces that are interfaced. The back facing that's interfaced. the collar stands. There's 2 of those and they're interfaced, and the collar pieces are interfaced, and there's 2 pieces. They cut on the bias and they will have a center back seam right there. These are the main lining pieces for the coat. This is the back. It's cut on the fold and there will be a small pleat there in the center back. There are waist studs there for shaping. And this is the back skirt piece that's also cut on the fold. Up on the top we have the front lining piece. It does look small, but there will be a facing sewn onto there that will complete the width of the coat. There is also a dart right there at the waist, and the front skirt pieces are 2 pieces. That is the center right there. Here are more pieces that you need for the coat. Some of them are made out of lining, some out of main fabric. These are the lining pieces for the sleeves, the upper sleeve, the under sleeve. That piece there is the sleeve head. It will support the shoulder seam, and I've cut that out of the main fabric. You can also cut that out of felt or other material. This funky little piece is the stay. It's just cut out of quilting cotton, and it'll be inside supporting the back. That is the neckline right there, the shoulder seam, and the armhole. It will just give stability to the coat. It doesn't need to match, it will be inside, no one will see it. This is the front facing piece. This will have the length of a coat. Both of these are interfaced. And this is a pocket bag from the main fabric and a pocket bag from the lining fabric. Now that you've seen all the pattern pieces ready to go, we are going to start with sewing. We are going to be sewing the bodice pieces, which means putting the center front, the side front, or the center of the back that also has a center back seam with the side back pieces. There are princess seams there. You'll find some areas that need to be stay stitched ahead of time. You'll see all of that. Let's go. What you can see here is a center front and a side front bodice. I've pinned them along the princess seam there, and over here I have the same thing done to the other side. You can see that both of these pieces are interfaced. This is the peak of my main fabric. You will see a notch at the height of the apex of the curve, and on the center front here you also have that same notch. You would have stay stitched about 2 inches above that. So there's a lot of stay stitching that's already happened that I did not film along every single neckline, for the bodice, for the facing, for the lining. Lots of places that would have already been stay stitched, and I'll show you where they are as I sew. But one of them is here on the center front above that notch there. I'm going to go ahead and sew this princess seam with 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then on this area that I stay stitched, I'm going to snip. That will relieve the tension here on this section here. And then the seam will be pressed in like that towards the center and top stitched from the outside. So I'll repeat the same with both of these 2 princess seams. This is the center front piece, and I have a section here where I had stay stitched, and I'm just going to snip for about those 2 inches there. Okay, after doing that, I'll repeat on the other side, and then I'll go to the iron and press the seam towards the center. After pressing the seam to the center, all of these princess seams and most of the seams get top stitched at 3/8 from the edge, so I'm using this presser foot to help me do that neatly. This is a 1/4 inch foot, and if you move the needle to the left, it'll go into that little hole and sew at 3/8. This is how the seam is going to look on that princess seam. I think it looks really pretty. So I'll just repeat that on that other front. What you see over here are the back pieces. There is a center back seam here, and I have already sewn that. It was one of the first things I did. That's already been sewn, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I have the 2 princess seams that will also sew. I will also top stitch, so it'll be just repeating the same process I'm doing to the front bodice pieces. I'll do to this. This seam from the center back is pressed to the left wearer side. So if I hold it like this, will be pressed towards this side, towards the left, as you wear it on your body. So I'll just put a pin there so I can remember. And the princess seams will also be pressed towards the center that way. These are 2 yoke pieces that will unite the back bodice and the front bodice, and they have this curved edge that has been stay stitched. Maybe you can see that. One side has a T and the other one has a U marked on it, and I've just marked those with coloring pencils. That doesn't come out like chalk does. So on the front you will see a T mark there, so that is what you match, the T with the T right there, right sides together, T and T. It's very easy to put together with all the letters and marks that this pattern has, so there's no way that you can go wrong. This is the yoke piece that goes attached to the front. You'll see that it matches there on the top, and pin the other one as well. There's a T hidden, but there is a T there that will match this T. So that is a little short seam that needs to be done. Okay, after pinning the yoke to the front pieces there, matching the T marks right there, we have the other side of the yoke. This will be sewn onto the back bodice, but before doing that we need to sew the stay onto the back bodice. This is the back bodice. It's all been completed, top stitched, everything. And we have this cotton piece that won't be seen. It'll be on the inside, so it doesn't matter that's this print. And we need to align this to the neckline and to the shoulder seams. This stay has also been stay stitched as one of the first steps, along with the back neckline, of course. So we need to pin the stay and just baste it along the edge within the seam allowance, and then also baste it along here, along all the edges of this stay within the seam allowance, and then we can attach this to the other side of the yoke piece. I've just basted along all the edges of this stay so it doesn't move anywhere, it will just stay there. Now I can finish pinning this section of the yoke. So I'll move this so I have right sides up. Here on this corner that hasn't been sewn, you'll find a U mark, and you'll find a U mark there, and this is where this goes. After pinning and sewing these seams on both of these yokes on both sides, these two seams will be pressed into the center of the yoke and then top stitched in the same way that the princess seams have at 3/8. So that will complete the shoulder area. There's no actual shoulder seam, it would be sort of in the center of this yoke. And then this other side also has a U, and you'll see a U right there, upside down U. Look, all these letters and marks on this pattern make it super easy to put together. It's just like putting a puzzle together. 2 straight seams, then I'll press them in and top stitch them. Now let me show you this collar. You can see it has a collar stand, right, starts there and it finishes right there. And then we have our collar. This collar that you see here is upper collar. It's not interfaced. It's a pattern piece that you cut in a single layer. At the back, this one is cut on the bias and it's got a center back seam right there, and that is the piece that is interfaced. So we're going to see now how to put all this collar together and then sew it to the neckline.
Tried to give you my soul, but you can't love something.
These are the 2 under collar pieces. They were cut on the bias. They have several marks to be done, several dots and dashes. They all have a reference with a letter that says V, P, R and S over here, and then there's the center here. Between the R and the S there is a row of stay stitching, if you can maybe see that on both sides. That was done previously, and the first step is to sew the center back seam of the under collar. Both of them were interfaced. All of the seams for the coat use 1/2 in each seam allowance. Then this seam needs to be pressed open, and we can put together one of the collar stands here. Center back seam has been pressed between these dashed lines that say R and S. That's where the stay stitch was done previously. Between that area we need to do some snips, and that will allow this curved area to extend and fit the under collar. So every 1/4 inch or so, snip but not right through the stay stitching. The stay stitching was done a tiny bit inside the seam allowance. These snips will allow this to extend and fit the under collar. What you can see from this dot in this corner is P, R, S. Those are the letters there. And these are the collar stands. There's 2 of those and they're interfaced. And just choose one of them. You will see the same reference marks, P, R, S, P, R, S. We'll put the collar here on the bottom, right sides up facing us, and then put the under collar on top. They are both right sides together. And we are going to match the center seam. There is a little mark right there. And then we're going to match this S to this S, S, and there's an S at the back. This dash with a R to this R right here is P, and P on the other side. So I'll match the same on the other side and then finish pinning, and then it's a seam that unites both of these together. Collar stand is pinned to the under collar, and we'll sew this at 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is where those snips allow this to extend and not create puckers and tension underneath. Before hopping over to the iron and pressing the seam open, I'm just going to trim it down to half, cut it down to 1/4 inch, it's 1/2 inch originally. And now I'll hop over to the iron and press the seam open. That is how that looks after being pressed. The seams are open. That's how it looks on the other side. Now we repeat this exact same thing with the upper collar and this other collar stand. The upper collar is not interfaced, and you will find the same reference marks that you found on the under collar. You will find the P, the R and the S right there. And it's really hard to mark on the wall, but I can see my marks and I can see my dots and dash very clearly. On the upper collar, there's also an area that has been stay stitched previous, and the same way that it was done with the under collar, we will snip into this area here. Quite a few snips to allow this curve to extend. And it's basically repeating the same process we've just done with the under collar. There is upper collar, the collar stand on top, and we match the S, the R and the P's along the curve right there. Here I'm sewing the upper collar to the collar stand with the same 1/2 inch seam allowance, being careful not to get any puckers on the bottom layer. Then I'm also going to trim the seam allowance to half and press the seams open, the same as we did with the other layer of the collar. This is upper collar sewn to the collar stand, that's already and pressed, the same as the other one. And now we unite them together. Now the under collar is smaller than the upper collar, so I'm going to place this one on top. You will need to stretch this to match this one so that they do match. Pin this all the way along. On this edge you will find a dot that has a V mark on it, same as on the other side. That is the dot that we are going to start sewing from, exactly there, not to the edge. So I'll make sure to match these dots here. There will be a V on the under collar as well. Make sure to match this one too. Then I'll just keep pinning. There is a V and a dot, and I'm going to start right there and reinforce. And here is the other V where I'm going to stop. These have been sewn together from that V, pivoting all the way up the top and down to the other V. Now we have the under collar facing us, the one that is interfaced. The upper collar is underneath, and that is because we need to trim the seam allowances to half, mainly in the under collar. I will just separate these two layers, make sure I'm not cutting them both, and I'll just trim this under collar to half to grade the seam allowance. Here where we have these intersections, I'm going to trim all the layers there, and then I'm going to keep trimming only the under collar to 1/4 inch. After grading the seam allowance, we can flip this, turn it right sides out, neaten it up and give it a good press. I've turned one of the collar points and it's looking very nice. Now I don't trim away over there, I don't like to weaken that area. So where I have that intersection of seams, I just fold it onto each other towards under collar to have the bulk at the back. Fold them right there on top of each other. I hold them there very firmly. Put my hand in between these two layers. Never let go of this that I'm holding very firmly, and I flip it. Now if I need a little bit of help, I just use a pencil that's quite blunt. I'm happy with the look of these two. Now I'll just keep sorting this out and pressing all this so it's nice and neat, and then we can top stitch around the top. Here is the collar all tidied up and neat. I tend to hand baste the edges there to keep the seams nice and neat before top stitching. I don't want anything to move out of place. I can easily remove that basting stitch and it's done, not where the top stitching is going to happen. Top stitching is going to be at 3/8. so it's quite far away, and then it can be removed very easily. So just sew from there, pivot, across, pivot, and then down. After top stitching, the two bottom layers of the collar stand are going to be basted together, so these can just act as one piece for the remainder of the construction. Now I've pinned all the bottom of the collar stand and just baste them together within the seam allowance. Now we return to the bodice piece that we have already sewn. On the center fronts you will see that notch. Starting beyond there, all along the curve, we need to snip, and that will allow us to sew on the collar piece easier. So I don't want to snip right up to the edge, I'll just start about 3/8 from there. Snip up to the stay stitch. There is the other notch, I'll just snip. When these two collar stands were basted together, we lost the marks that were inside on the wrong side. So you can't see them anymore. So I went ahead and marked the two dots that were supposed to be there. There is the center back of the collar stand, and then there was a dot there and a dot there. They have marks with U and T on them, but I don't really think you need to worry about them. The only thing you need to know is that these dots need to match the yoke seams. So you will have them here as well. We take our neckline, we have right sides together of the neckline, and we place the side of the collar that has the under collar. You can tell because there's a center back seam, right sides together there. Now we will match that notch that is the center back with the center back of the neckline right there, and then those other two dots with the yokes. So we have one seam of the yoke there that should match that dot. I'm going to put a pin right through here so I know where that dot is specifically, right there, and this will match this notch from the yoke. Then the next dot, then this dot will match the yoke to the front, that seam right there, and then the edge of the collar should match that notch on the center front piece that's interfaced. So when you look at the edge of this collar, if you poke a pin through it at the seam allowance, 1/2 inch, it will come out right at that dot there on the other side. This is why this was all snipped, because it's very curved and it needs to conform to this. So I'll just take my time and match these two dots to the yoke on the other side. Make sure this matches the reference marks here on this other center front. Once that's all pinned, we can just baste it together, long stitch length. Okay, this is all pinned. I'm just going to baste all these layers together using a long stitch length and within the seam allowance. These layers here can be quite bulky. Make sure it's all smooth at the back and that you're not getting any folds and puckers. It's easy for that to happen because this is such a curved seam right here. So the collar is on, we will forget about it for a while and we will continue constructing this by sewing the side seams on the bodice. The coat is coming along, you see everything is doable up to now. Take it step by step. Now the next 2 steps are very, very easy. The side seams of the coat are very short and it's because there's a waistband under there. So now we just have to sew these 2 little seams and then attach the waistband to the bottom of the bodice. So let's go ahead and see that.
It's too late to repair what we made.
After sewing the side seams here, they are very short seams. We can sew on the waistband. The side seams have 1/2 inch seam allowance, and for these seams they are pressed open. They're not top stitched or anything like the other ones were. So we'll just quickly close up these 2 side seams. the bottom of the bodice and the waistband has been pinned right sides together. You will match this to the center. Along the waistband you will find notches here and there. This will later match onto the skirt or the coat. That will match that princess seam. Then you'll have another one matching the side seam, another one matching the back princess seam, the other one, and all the way around. It should match perfectly if you've sewn your seam allowances of the main bodice pieces accurately. So everything matches and it's just a straight seam all the way around. Then we press the seam allowance towards the waistband. So if we look at the bodice like that, it's been pressed down. And then we top stitch the same as we've done everywhere else with a 3/8 seam allowance. Very easy steps, and then we can put this aside and start working on the skirt pieces, the pockets to be exact. This is where episode 2 of the Lagan Coat Sew Along ends. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you can see that you can actually do it. You can see the seams being sewn. There's nothing really complex. It's just more seams, more of these than what you would do with another type of project. But there's nothing specially complex. I really hope to inspire you to keep going. Please sew your coat. The Lagan Coat from Itch to Stitch is still on sale during its release week through Tuesday the 13th. If you still haven't got your copy, go ahead and get it. If my sewing inspires you and this sew along is helping you, I'd really appreciate it if you use my affiliate link. Part of that sale comes back to me as a small commission and you don't pay anything extra, so that really helps support the work that I do here on the channel. Thank you so much if you use my link, and I'll see you tomorrow with episode 3, where we will sew the pockets, the skirt pieces and the sleeves. So that's coming next. I'll see you again very soon. Bye.